Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Boy to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby! Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from The Pickwick Papers, written by Charles Dickens and first published in 1836. This story follows Mr. Pickwick and his associates during 1830s England. My name is Teddy, and I aim to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those of you who are new to the podcast, you may not know that it started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I'm so grateful for the amazing community we've built together. The podcast is self-made and self-produced. That is why you'll hear a short ad at the beginning of each episode. These ads, along with the support from subscribers and patrons on Patreon, enable me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. If you find the podcast beneficial and would like to support it, here are a few ways you can contribute. Follow the podcast in your podcast app and leave a comment. Become a subscriber for $2.99 per month. This also creates for an ad-free experience while supporting episode creation. If subscribing is not possible, and I completely understand if it is not, an easy way to help is simply by leaving a review and rating in your podcast app. If you would like to support the show with a monthly contribution, please visit boytosleep.com. Patreon is a great way to do this. The other way is simply by clicking on the link in the show notes and subscribing to the episode. If you know someone out there who also needs a good night's rest, please feel free to share this podcast with them. In the meantime, lie back, relax, and enjoy the readings. The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. Chapter 1. The Pickwickians. The first ray of light, which illumines the gloom, and converts into a dazzling brilliancy that obscurity in which the earlier history of the public career of the immortal Pickwick would appear to be involved, is derived from the perusal of the following entry in the Transactions of the Pickwick Club, which the editor of these papers feels the highest pleasure in laying before his readers, as a proof of the careful attention, indefatigable assiduity, and nice discrimination with which his search among the multifarious documents confided to him has been conducted. May 12th, 1827, Joseph Smiggers, Esquire, PVP, MPC, Perpetual Vice President, Member Pickwick Club, presiding. The following resolutions unanimously agreed to, that this association has heard read, with feelings of unmingled satisfaction and unqualified approval, the paper communicated by Samuel Pickwick Esquire, G.C., MPC, General Chairman, Member Pickwick Club, entitled Speculations on the Source of the Hampstead Ponds, with some observations on the theory of tittlebats, and that this association does hereby return its warmest thanks to the said Samuel Pickwick Esquire, G.C., MPC, for the same. That while this association is deeply sensible of the advantages which must accrue to the cause of science, from the production to which they have just adverted, no less than from the unwearied researches of Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, G.C., MPC, in Hornsey, Highgate, Brixton, and Camberwell, they cannot but entertain a lively sense of the inestimable benefits which must inevitably result from carrying the speculations of that learned man into a wider field, from extending his travels and, consequently, enlarging his sphere of observation, to the advancement of knowledge and the diffusion of learning. That, with the view just mentioned, this association has taken into its serious consideration a proposal emanating from the aforesaid Samuel Pickwick Esquire, G.C., MPC, and 3 other Pickwickians hereinafter named, for forming a new branch of United Pickwickians, under the title of the Corresponding Society of the Pickwick Club. That the said proposal has received the sanction and approval of this association, that the Corresponding Society of the Pickwick Club is therefore hereby constituted, and that Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, G.C., MPC, Tracy Tupman, Esquire, MPC, Augustus Snodgrass, Esquire, MPC, and Nathaniel Winkle, Esquire, MPC, are hereby nominated and appointed members of the same, and that they be requested to forward from time to time authenticated accounts of their journeys and investigations, of their observations of character and manners, and of the whole of their adventures, together with all tales and papers to which local scenery or associations may give rise, to the Pickwick Club, stationed in London. That this association cordially recognises the principle of every member of the corresponding society defraying his own travelling expenses, and that it sees no objection whatever to the members of the said society pursuing their inquiries for any length of time they please, upon the same terms. That the members of the aforesaid corresponding society be, and are hereby informed, that their proposal to pay the postage of their letters and the carriage of their parcels has been deliberated upon by this association, that this association considers such proposal worthy of the great minds from which it emanated, and that it hereby signifies its perfect acquiescence therein. A casual observer adds the secretary, to whose notes we are indebted for the following account. A casual observer might possibly have remarked nothing extraordinary in the bald head, and circular spectacles which were intently tuned towards the secretary's face, during the reading of the above resolutions. To those who knew that the gigantic brain of Pickwick was working beneath that forehead, and that the beaming eyes of Pickwick were twinkling behind those glasses. The sight was indeed an interesting one. There sat the men who had traced to their source the mighty ponds of Hampstead, and agitated the scientific world with his theory of tittlebats, as calm and unmoved as the deep waters of the one on a frosty day, or as a solitary specimen of the other in the inmost recesses of an earthen jar. And how much more interesting did the spectacle become when starting into full life and animation, as a simultaneous call for Pickwick burst from his followers. That illustrious man slowly mounted into the Windsor chair, on which he had been previously seated, and addressed the club himself had founded. What a study for an artist did that exciting scene present. The elegant Pickwick, with one hand gracefully concealed behind his coat tails, and the other waving in air to assist his glowing declamation, his elevated position revealing those tights and gaiters which, had they clothed an ordinary man, might have passed without observation, but which, when Pickwick clothed them, if we may use the expression, inspired involuntary awe and respect, surrounded by the men who had volunteered to share the perils of his travels, and who were destined to participate in the glories of his discoveries. On his right sat Mr. Tracy Tupman, the too susceptible Tupman, who to the wisdom and experience of maturer years superadded the enthusiasm and ardour of a boy in the most interesting and pardonable of human weaknesses, love. Time and feeding had expanded that once romantic form. The black silk waistcoat had become more and more developed. Inch by inch had the gold watch chain beneath it disappeared from within the range of Tupman's vision, and gradually had the capacious chin encroached upon the borders of the white cravat. But the soul of Tupman had known no change. Admiration of the fair sex was still its ruling passion. On the left of his great leader sat the poetic Snodgrass, and near him again the sporting Winkle, the former poetically enveloped in a mysterious blue cloak with a canine skin collar, and the latter communicating additional lustre to a new green shooting coat, plaid neckerchief, and closely fitted drabs. Mr. Pickwick's oration upon this occasion, together with the debate thereon, is entered on the Transactions of the Club. Both bear a strong affinity to the discussions of other celebrated bodies, and as it is always interesting to trace a resemblance between the proceedings of great men, we transfer the entry to these pages. Mr. Pickwick observed, says the secretary, that fame was dear to the heart of every man. Poetic fame was dear to the heart of his friend Snodgrass, and the fame of conquest was equally dear to his friend Tupman, and the desire of earning fame in the sports of the field, the air, and the water was uppermost in the breast of his friend Winkle. He, Mr. Pickwick, would not deny that he was influenced by human passions and human feelings, cheers, possibly by human weaknesses, loud cries of no. But this he would say, that if ever the fire of self-importance broke out in his bosom, the desire to benefit the human race in preference effectually quenched it. The praise of mankind was his swing. Philanthropy was his insurance office. Vehement cheering. He had felt some pride, he acknowledged it freely, and let his enemies make the most of it. He had felt some pride when he presented his Tittlebatian theory to the world. It might be celebrated, or it might not. A cry of "it is," and great cheering. He would take the assertion of that honourable Pickwickian whose voice he had just heard. It was celebrated. But if the fame of that treatise were to extend to the farthest confines of the known world, the pride with which he should reflect on the authorship of that production would be as nothing compared with the pride with which he looked around him, on this the proudest moment of his existence. Cheers. He was a humble individual. No. Still, he could not but feel that they had selected him for a service of great honour, and of some danger. Travelling was in a troubled state, and the minds of coachmen were unsettled. Let them look abroad and contemplate the scenes which were enacting around them. Stagecoaches were upsetting in all directions, horses were bolting, boats were overturning, and boilers were bursting. Cheers. A voice, no. Cheers. Let that honourable Pickwickian who cried no so loudly come forward and deny it, if he could. Cheers. Who was it that cried no? Enthusiastic cheering. Was it some vain and disappointed man? He would not say haberdasher, loud cheers, who, jealous of the praise which had been, perhaps undeservedly, bestowed on his, Mr. Pickwick's, researches, and smarting under the censure which had been heaped upon his own feeble attempts at rivalry, now took this vile and calumnious mode of. Mr. Blotton of Altgate rose to order. Did the Honourable Pickwickian allude to him? Cries of order, chair, yes, no, go on, leave off, etc. Mr. Pickwick would not put up to be put down by clamour. He had alluded to the honourable gentleman, great excitement. Mr. Blotton would only say then that he repelled the honourable gentleman's false and scurrilous accusation with profound contempt. Great cheering. The honourable gentleman was a humbug. Immense confusion and loud cries of chair and order. Mr. A. Snodgrass rose to order. He threw himself upon the chair. Here. He wished to know whether this disgraceful contest between two members of that club should be allowed to continue. Here. The chairman was quite sure the Honourable Pickwickian would withdraw the expression he had just made use of. Mr. Blotton, with all possible respect for the chair, was quite sure he would not. He had used the word in its Pickwickian sense. Here. He was bound to acknowledge that, personally, he entertained the highest regard and esteem for the honourable gentleman. He had merely considered him a humbug in a Pickwickian point of view. Here. Mr. Pickwick felt much gratified by the fair, candid, and full explanation of his honourable friend. He begged it to be at once understood that his own observations had been merely intended to bear a Pickwickian construction. Cheers. Here the entry terminates, as we have no doubt the debate did also, after arriving at such a highly satisfactory and intelligible point. We have no official statement of the facts which the reader will find recorded in the next chapter, but they have been carefully collated from letters and other MS authorities, so unquestionably genuine as to justify their narration in a connected form. Chapter 2. The first day's journey and the first evening's adventures, with their consequences. That punctual servant of all work, the sun, had just risen, and begun to strike a light on the morning of the 13th of May, 1827, when Mr. Samuel Pickwick burst like another sun from his slumbers, threw open his chamber window, and looked out upon the world beneath. Goswell Street was at his feet. Goswell Street was on his right hand. As far as the eye could reach, Goswell Street extended on his left, and the opposite side of Goswell Street was over the way. Such, thought Mr. Pickwick, are the narrow views of those philosophers who, content with examining the things that lie before them, look not to the truths which are hidden beyond. As well might I be content to gaze on Goswell Street forever, without one effort to penetrate to the hidden countries which on every side surround it. And having given vent to this beautiful reflection, Mr. Pickwick proceeded to put himself into his clothes, and his clothes into his portmanteau. Great men are seldom over-scrupulous in the arrangement of their attire. The operation of shaving, dressing, and coffee imbibing was soon performed, and in another hour Mr. Pickwick, with his portmanteau in his hand, his telescope in his greatcoat pocket, and his notebook in his waistcoat, ready for the reception of any discoveries worthy of being noted down, had arrived at the coach-stand in St. Martin's-le-Grand. "Cab," said Mr. Pickwick. "Here you are, sir," shouted a strange specimen of the human race, in a sackcloth coat and apron of the same, who, with a brass label and number round his neck, looked as if he were catalogued in some collection of rarities. This was the waterman. "Here you are now, sir. Now then, fust cab." And the first cab, having been fetched from the public-house, where he had been smoking his first pipe, Mr. Pickwick and his portmanteau were thrown into the vehicle. "Golden Cross," said Mr. Pickwick. "Only a Bobsworth, Tommy," cried the driver sulkily, for the information of his friend, the waterman, as the cab drove off. "How old is that horse, my friend?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, rubbing his nose with the shilling he had reserved for the fare. 42, replied the driver, eyeing him askant. "What?" exerted Mr. Pickwick, laying his hand upon his notebook. The driver reiterated his former statement. Mr. Pickwick looked very hard at the man's face, but his features were immovable, so he noted down the fact forthwith. "And how long do you keep him out at a time?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, searching for further information. 2 or 3 weeks, replied the man. "Weeks," said Mr. Pickwick in astonishment, and out came the notebook again. "He lives at Pentonville when he's at home," observed the driver coolly, "but we seldom takes him home on account of his weakness." "On account of his weakness," reiterated the perplexed Mr. Pickwick. "He always falls down when he's took out of the cab," continued the driver, "but when he's in it, we bears him up wery tight, and take him in wery short, so as he can't wery well fall down. And we've got a pair of precious large wheels on, so when he does move, they run after him, and he must go on, he can't help it." Mr. Pickwick entered every word of this statement in his notebook, with the view of communicating it to the club, as a singular instance of the tenacity of life in horses under trying circumstances. The entry was scarcely completed when they reached the Golden Cross. Down jumped the driver, and out got Mr. Pickwick, Mr. Tupman, Mr. Snodgrass, and Mr. Winkle, who had been anxiously waiting the arrival of their illustrious leader, crowded to welcome him. "Here's your fare," said Mr. Pickwick, holding out the shilling to the driver. What was the learned man's astonishment when that unaccountable person flung the money on the pavement and requested in figurative terms to be allowed the pleasure of fighting him, Mr. Pickwick, for the amount. "You are mad," said Mr. Snodgrass. "Or drunk," said Mr. Winkle. "Or both," said Mr. Tupman. "Come on," said the cab driver, sparring away like clockwork. "Come on, all four of you." "Here's a lark," shouted half a dozen hackney coachmen. "Go to work, Sam." And they crowded with great glee round the party. "What's the row, Sam?" inquired one gentleman in black calico sleeves. "Row," replied the cabman. "What did he want my number for?" "I didn't want your number," said the astonished Mr. Pickwick. "What did you take it for, then?" inquired the cabman. "I didn't take it," said Mr. Pickwick indignantly. "Would anyone believe," continued the cab driver, appealing to the crowd, "would anyone believe as an informer'd go about in a man's cab, not only taken down his number, but every word he says into the bargain?" A light flashed upon Mr. Pickwick. It was the notebook. "Did he, though?" inquired another cabman. "Yes, did he," replied the first. "And then, arter adjuwatin' me to assault him, gets 3 witnesses here to approve it. But I'll give it him, if I've 6 months for it. Come on," and the cabman dashed his hat upon the ground, with a reckless disregard of his own private property, and knocked Mr. Pickwick's spectacles off, and followed up the attack with a blow on Mr. Pickwick's nose, and another on Mr. Pickwick's chest, and a third in Mr. Snodgrass's eye, and a fourth, by way of variety, in Mr. Tupman's waistcoat, and then danced into the road, and then back again to the pavement, and finally dashed the whole temporary supply of breath out of Mr. Winkle's body, and all in half a dozen seconds. "Where's an officer?" said Mr. Snodgrass. "Put 'em under the pump," suggested a hot pieman. "You shall smart for this," gasped Mr. Pickwick. "Informers," shouted the crowd. "Come on," cried the cabman, who had been sparring without cessation the whole time. The mob hitherto had been passive spectators of the scene, but as the intelligence of the Pickwickians being informers was spread among them, they began to canvass with considerable vivacity the propriety of enforcing the heated pastry vendor's proposition, and there is no saying what acts of personal aggression they might have committed, had not the affray been unexpectedly terminated by the interposition of a newcomer. "What's the fun?" said a rather tall, thin young man in a green coat, emerging suddenly from the coach-yard. "Informers," shouted the crowd again. "We are not," roared Mr. Pickwick in a tone which, to any dispassionate listener, carried conviction with it. "Ain't you, though? Ain't you?" said the young man, appealing to Mr. Pickwick, and making his way through the crowd by the infallible process of elbowing the countenances of his component members. That learned man, in a few hurried words, explained the real state of the case. "Come along, then," said he of the green coat, lugging Mr. Pickwick after him by main force, and talking the whole way. "Here, number 924, take your fare, and take yourself off, respectable gentlemen. Know him well. None of your nonsense. This way, sir. Where's your friends? All a mistake, I see. Never mind. Accidents will happen. Best regulated families never say die. Down upon your luck. Pull him up. Put that in his pipe. Like the flavour. Damned rascals." And with a lengthened string of similar broken sentences, delivered with extraordinary volubility, the stranger led the way to the traveller's waiting room, whither he was closely followed by Mr. Pickwick and his disciples. "Here, waiter," shouted the stranger, ringing the bell with tremendous violence. "Glasses round, brandy and water, hot and strong and sweet, and plenty. I damaged, sir. Waiter, raw beef steak for the gentleman's eye. Nothing like raw beef steak for a bruise, sir. Cold lamp post very good, but lamp post inconvenient. Damned odd standing in the open street half an hour, with your eye against a lamp post. Very good, ha ha." And the stranger, without stopping to take breath, swallowed at a draught full half a pint of the reeking brandy and water, and flung himself into a chair, with as much ease as if nothing uncommon had occurred. While his three companions were busily engaged in proffering their thanks to their new acquaintance, Mr. Pickwick had leisure to examine his costume and appearance. He was about the middle height, but the thinness of his body and the length of his legs gave him the appearance of being much taller. The green coat had been a smart dress garment in the days of swallow tails, but had evidently in those times adorned a much shorter man than the stranger, for the soiled and faded sleeves scarcely reached to his wrists. It was buttoned closely up to his chin, at the imminent hazard of splitting the back, and an old stock, without a vestige of shirt collar, ornamented his neck. His scanty black trousers displayed here and there those shiny patches which bespeak long service, and were strapped very tightly over a pair of patched and mended shoes, as if to conceal the dirty white stockings, which were nevertheless distinctly visible. His long, black hair escaped in negligent waves from beneath each side of his old pinched-up hat, and glimpses of his bare wrists might be observed between the tops of his gloves and the cuffs of his coat sleeves. His face was thin and haggard, but an indescribable air of jaunty impudence and perfect self-possession pervaded the whole man. Such was the individual on whom Mr. Pickwick gazed through his spectacles, which he had fortunately recovered, and to whom he proceeded, when his friends had exhausted themselves, to return in chosen terms to his warmest thanks for his recent assistance. "Never mind," said the stranger, cutting the address very short. "Said enough, no more, smart chap. That cabman handled his fives well. But if I'd been your friend in the green jemmy, damn me, punch his head. Cod I would, pig's whisper, pieman too. No gammon." This coherent speech was interrupted by the entrance of the Rochester coachman, to announce that the Commodore was on the point of starting. "Commodore," said the stranger, "starting up my coach. Place booked. One outside. Leave you to pay for the brandy and water. Want change for a 5. Bad silver. Brummagem buttons. Won't do. No go, eh? And he shook his head most knowingly. Now it so happened that Mr. Pickwick and his 3 companions had resolved to make Rochester their first halting place too, and having intimated to their new-found acquaintance that they were journeying to the same city, they agreed to occupy the seat at the back of the coach, where they could all sit together. "Up with you," said the stranger, assisting Mr. Pickwick onto the roof with so much precipitation as to impair the gravity of that gentleman's deportment very materially. "Any luggage, sir?" inquired the coachman. "Who I? Brown paper parcel here. That's all. Other luggage gone by water. Packing cases nailed up. Big as houses. Heavy, heavy, damned heavy," replied the stranger, as he forced into his pocket as much as he could of the brown paper parcel, which presented most suspicious indications of containing one shirt and a handkerchief. "Heads, heads, take care of your heads," cried the loquacious stranger, as they came out under the low archway, which in those days formed the entrance to the coachyard. Terrible place, dangerous work. Other day, 5 children, mother, tall lady, eating sandwiches. Forgot to arch, crash, knock. Children look around. Mother's head off. Sandwich in her head. No mouth to put it in. Head of a family off. Shocking, shocking. Looking at Whitehall, sir. Fine place. Little window. Somebody else's head off there. Sir. He didn't keep a sharp lookout enough either. Sir, And that concludes tonight's readings. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this story, and if you're not quite tired yet, you're always welcome to listen to another episode of the Boy to Sleep podcast. Until next time, good night.